Hey everyone, welcome to the Broadcast, episode 10. If you haven't listened in yet, you're in for a treat because today's episode is going to be fun. It's going to be relevant to what's in the news currently, and we're going to keep it a little bit light today, okay, because I'm feeling good. It's National Coffee Day. Everyone knows that I'm a big proponent of supporting local. Got my coffee right here if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening in, you can hear. Go out and make sure you buy yourself coffee. Stay caffeinated today. And stay away from those big corporate shops like Starbucks or Caribou Coffee. They're just going to take profits from the little guys, and that's not what you want. You want to support local. I've got some local places in Reston I go to. There's a place called Lake Ann Coffee House. Love it. Also Weird Brothers Coffee, which is in Reston. I love that too. They're both great. Highly recommended if you're in the area. But without further ado, let's actually get into what I'm going to talk about today, which is three specific things. So I want to talk a little bit about the election. I want to talk a little bit about ballot harvesting, and I want to talk a little bit about fallacies. And I think they'll all tie together in the end, and you'll understand why it's a little bit more fun, because we're going to actually take an article today and take a look at it and kind of go into what I think are the most important pieces towards the end of this podcast. So first off, just so you know, we have our first debate. So if you're not listening in the United States, and I have found that a lot of folks that have been listening to the broadcast have been from overseas, which is really cool to see so many different countries with different people in them that are actually listening to the podcast and, enjoying the content, hopefully, thanks to you guys. But if you guys haven't realized it yet, we have an election year here in the United States coming up. And right before an election, which is on November 3rd, my birthday, if you guys want to get me anything, just kidding, but, I'm not going to stop you. Either way, with that being said, we have this election coming up on November 3rd for the President of the United States. Now, tonight is actually the first debate between the two presidents, and we're going to see them basically discuss what they feel is the most important topics to them. We're going to have them actually take some questions from the audience, and we're going to get a better feel for who we think they are from a personal standpoint, right? Because up until this point, we should already know what their platform is, what their base is, and what they stand for. But the whole point of these discussions, the whole point of these debates really is to get into the head of a candidate to understand if they're capable of doing the job. And that's important for a couple different reasons, right? Because A, you don't want a candidate that just says, this is my platform and this is what I stick to, right? Because that's actually not the best solution for winning and for doing the best you can. And you can actually apply this understanding and this logic and this knowledge to yourself as well, because there's going to be times in your life where you find that the right answer may not exactly be aligned to what you believe in, or what you have morally considered good, or what you have decided is the right way to move forward. And you have to look at yourself and look at society and look at what is the value of choosing the right decision, and determine internally if making the right decision is the move you want to make, albeit going against your own morals, going against your own judgment, and perhaps changing your mind on a few things that you haven't considered, right? So that's an important piece, right? That's why it's important to remain lucid and to be able to think for yourself, right? Now, another interesting part of the debates is when you actually look at it statistically, most people are rarely swayed by the debates at all. In fact, most American voters actually have already chosen a candidate or have already voted early via absentee or sign-in, ballot. And basically, the interesting part is one would then question, what is the point for even having a debate to begin with if most Americans have determined that they already know who they're going to go with, who they're going to side with. And I personally think, and I'm someone who I've decided that on the broadcast, we're not going to discuss politics. We're going to keep that out of it. You're welcome to believe whatever you want, whoever you want. And I think both candidates are fine options. And I think both candidates would potentially, if they worked on themselves, could both become better people in general. Now, does that mean that I think one candidate's better than the other? Well, that's something that is kind of irrelevant, right? Because what I think is not what you should do. What you think is what you should do. You should always take what you believe is the right answer and go with that, because at the end of the day, even if you make the wrong decision, you internally get to live with a choice that you chose to make. And that choice, that choosing of deciding what's wrong or right, electing to choose something wrong or electing to choose something right, is what allows people to live with those decisions long term. But when you are removed or pulled away from that choice and that decision, it becomes something that can start to eat away at who you are. But that's another discussion that we'll get into another time. But back to the debates, essentially. So we have this population of folks in the United States where they've already basically decided who they are going to vote for. And it's like, well, then why do we need the debates, right? And it's because that is kind of a tradition in the United States. We've always had a debate. It's always happened unless the president's been brought into office through one of the presidents dying or something like that. But essentially every year in history, since as far as you can go back, I think besides George Washington, right, you've always had debates, right? So it's one of those things where it's like you follow tradition to follow tradition, even though it's very unlikely to sway anyone. And the idea that people are going to even be honest and open in a debate is very unlikely as well, specifically because the whole, in my personal belief, political sector is at least morally corrupt at best. And that's as far as I'm going to go into that. But taking that a step further, one of the interesting things you heard from someone who I think is actually quite a brilliant mind and one of the newer people coming up in the United States who has some potential in the future to really become a thought leader and potentially a political leader as well, as Tulsi Gabbard. I've always admired her because she served in the military. I don't agree with everything she says, but I think that when it comes to politics, especially the seat of the president, having a part of you that served in the military that was able to command troops, which is more or less the primary job of the president, actually, as the commander-in-chief of the military. But having that background allows you to understand how things work better, and it also allows you to kind of have a different perspective than someone who might come from business or the political scene or anywhere else might come from, or just money, which a lot of times in this country, in order to become an elected official, you just have to have money, and you have to basically come from some family where you see these returning names like the Kennedys, the Clintons, the Bushes, and they just kind of, they never leave. Their families are just ingrained in the political system, and it's kind of like a ruling elite class that you just can't get rid of. And now, stop there before you yell at me and jump through the screen and strangle me. I'm not saying whether they're good or bad people. That's, again, we're not bringing politics into the show. This is just my personal beliefs on the political system, right? So to keep the candidates and my opinions about them out of your mind, I will bring up people that I admire from time to time, but not because they're political candidates. Again, Tulsi Gabbard's a great example, but because of their history and what they're doing and who they are as people, right? Tulsi Gabbard I also like for another reason. Sorry, I hit the mic there, but I also like her for another reason, because she stands up for what she believes in, and a lot of people do that, but I feel like it comes from a place of looking for a gotcha versus speaking your truth, which I think is one of the most important things to anyone in the entire world. And on that note, she recently posted something where she was speaking her truth, if you will, about ballot harvesting, right? Now, that's a negative context to describe something that was created from a perspective of helping people that find it difficult to vote for whatever reason, right? And the whole concept of ballot harvesting is actually not so malevolent as it might sound, right? But it essentially is helping people who either can't get to the polls or can't vote or can't mail something. Now, and before you say anything, everyone has a different situation. Everyone comes from a different area. Everyone has a different background, and so you shouldn't discredit people who may have more difficulties voting than you or anyone else, right? But essentially, these groups of people will send out mailers to people saying, "Here's your vote. Please vote here," and then we'll pick it up and collect it, essentially, right? And what was brought up today is that there has been some reports allegedly of ballot harvesting, and that essentially means that those people that would collect those votes, if you will, to my understanding, basically either are not depositing them in the mail to be called for in the election, or they're outright destroying them or changing them, right? And so those are all the negative aspects of ballot harvesting. Now, that is something that is obviously not good, but we do have systems in place that can prevent the negative outcome of that. Little sip of coffee real quick. One of the beautiful things about our Constitution and what our founding fathers created was that they actually created a system in place that would prevent something like this from essentially changing an election and a vote in our country, which is the Electoral College. Now, I'll be honest with you, my mind is not made up about the Electoral College yet. For me personally, I think that if we could find a way to make sure that everyone's vote counted once, and everyone could get to the polls and vote, so it's a two-way street, right? We have to make sure, A, no one double votes, and no one who's not a citizen gets to vote, and B, we also have to make sure that everyone's vote is heard. I think if we could satisfy those two requirements in any meaningful way, I would be 100% comfortable with getting rid of the Electoral College, right? But, and for everyone who's might be listening overseas, what this Electoral College is, right, essentially is a group of delegates, so already elected officials or people that were chosen by elected officials to vote and decide on who the president is, okay? And so essentially what they do is they basically, once we cast the popular vote, so my vote, right, that's only going to count for one vote out of however many people are in the United States. And at the end of the day, you could have essentially 100% of the people vote for, and I'm using an exaggerated scenario to prove a point, but you could have 100% of the people vote for one candidate. But if the Electoral College decides that the other candidate should be president, well, they lose. The candidate that I voted for loses automatically because I technically don't get a meaningful vote. It's what we call in the United States the popular vote versus the electoral vote, okay? Now, that brings up a lot of questions. That brings up a lot of confusion. That brings up a lot of potentially angst. And it's like, yeah, there's a lot of things that need to be answered about that. One of the biggest questions is, well, if you don't get a vote, what does it matter to even vote? Now, I'm not going to be the person to give you 100 different reasons, but I can tell you why I vote. And I vote, again, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the debates. It's more of a traditional thing, right? I believe that it's important to cast your vote no matter what, because if you don't cast your vote, then you shouldn't get a say in the political system. And then, someone who, this is something I've struggled with a lot, actually, is, well, what if I don't find a candidate that I like? It's like, okay, well then, should you not vote? No, I don't think you should not vote. I think that you should still vote for who you believe in or who you think is the best candidate, right? I'm not a fan of political parties in general. I have more distaste for political parties than just about anything else in the world. There's a few things, and a couple of my close friends know them, and they'll come out shortly at some point in time. But, not a fan of political parties. I'm someone who votes for the person. I don't vote for the party, right? And that means that a lot of times when I vote for people that I disagree with. I vote for people that I disagree with completely, that may not have my best interests in their hands or in their plans or in whatever platform they're running on. Because the way I look at it is, what is the moral good? What is the right choice that's going to help the most amount of people and cause the least amount of harm? Because at the end of the day, people are going to feel disenfranchised or potentially hurt on either side. And it's like, you have to, I think that at least I do, you have to look at yourself and say, well, is this election about me? Am I voting for myself? Am I voting for my own selfish wants and needs and goals? Or am I voting to change something for the better, to help a larger population become who they are, right? To help them grow in society, to help them better themselves. Okay? And so when I vote, I take into consideration the whole population, which leads me to voting a lot of times for people that I really don't like, but I believe in. Okay, and that's the key, right? I want someone who I can believe in, who when they say something, I can hear it back, and I believe what they're saying, and I believe that they want to change things for the good. Now, enough about voting, enough about ballot harvesting. But essentially, we have quite a complex system in the United States, and a lot of it doesn't always make sense, but I think it's always important to have the discussion and have the debate as to why you want to change something, because a lot of times if you just go around changing things, you potentially overlook reasons why things were created, and you don't solve that problem. So I'm not saying don't change things. That's the beauty of the Constitution. It's made to be changed. Okay? Let's let that sit in. The Constitution is made to be changed. That's why we have amendments, okay? But with that being said, let's consider all the reasons why things were created and figure out, okay, maybe this rule doesn't apply now anymore, so let's change that. Brilliant. Okay, but what are the implications of that? Oh, well, all these other things are going to happen. Okay, well then let's add that. Let's add a fix for those things that we know are potentially going to happen if we change something into this new rule we have, if that makes sense. So that's my 2 cents on that. Now, let's get into something a little fun, if I can find it. Okay, gotcha. All right, let me grab a sip of water. Now, all this talk about political debate and ballot harvesting and how the United States system works has me thinking about logical fallacies. Okay, well, why is this so important? Because I think you're going to find, if you decide to tune into the debates tonight, plenty of logical fallacies where you're going to hear people talk and repeat things that may not make sense to you, and your brain's going to catch it, but you're not going to realize what it is. And that is an important point, because if you can make it that far and you can catch just does that really make sense? Then boom, you already know that there's probably something that is not true about what they're saying. And I think that, again, this is why I'm not a big fan of politics in general. These folks are not inherently true. They're just out there trying to get a vote. I believe they don't really care, at least most of the candidates don't. But with that being said, you're going to hear a lot of these logical fallacies. And it's like, well, what is a logical fallacy? So a logical fallacy is essentially something where someone tries to convince you of something that may not be true in a way that is not an outright lie, but it's something that doesn't make sense and doesn't add up, okay? And it's easier to get into it and start explaining these things in just a moment. And I have an article pulled up by The Best Schools magazine. I think that's incredibly just not original in terms of a magazine name whatsoever, but we'll get into it in a second, and I'll explain why. But essentially, these logical fallacies, you have to guard yourself against them. And if you don't, you're going to go through life being taken advantage of. And that's another thing that I absolutely hate, is I hate to see people taken advantage of. I'd rather them make their own decisions with the best information they have, and allow them to choose failure or success on their own, versus having someone try to pull the wool over their eyes, or having someone try to convince them something that's not true. I find that to be dirty, and I find that to be absolutely foul. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and that is what I think you're going to see a lot in the debate tonight from both sides, likely. And remember, these are people that they've been talking like this. They've been up on these stages. They've been in the political system in one way or another their entire lives. So they're used to this. They're used to just lying without thinking. And that blows my mind, and that should blow your mind as well. I don't know how to fix that problem. I really don't. I hope that someday we can. But right now it looks like there's going to be a lot of fallacies we're going to hear tonight. So anyways, this article by The Best Schools, right? This talks about some of the most common logical fallacies. And I'm not going to go into all of them, but let's take a look at some of them and let's go from there. So the first one is called an ad hominem fallacy, right? And what does that mean? Essentially, that means basically it's Latin for against the man. Okay. And this essentially means instead of advancing good sound reasoning, an ad hominem replaces logical argumentation with attack language unrelated to the truth of the matter. Well, what does that mean? Well, this is something you've seen a lot of times in history, right? So I'm a big proponent of like World War II history because I think that there's so much rich culture and rich knowledge you can pull from there to understand the implications of how these two ideologies came to clash, right? And how the world essentially fought off a greater evil, in my personal opinion. But we're going to use that as an example because it's something that everyone has a base knowledge of, okay? And there's things about World War II that are just common knowledge, or they should be, that people will be easier to understand, right? Now, so back to what I'm saying. So this ad hominem attack, right? This is when someone, and using World War II as an example, would say something like, they can't do this, that, or the other because they're Jewish, or all this negative connotation that came out of World War II against the Jews, right? And you see that sometimes today. Racism is very prevalent in America today, and a lot of times you do see things that come out such as, they can't do this or that because they're black, or a under the radar one is, well, you can't say this or that, whatever, because you're white, or you can't get into you just got into this certain school because you're Asian, things like that. This is not good. You're basically attacking a person for who they are, and it's also something that goes further than that, right? Because that's just the top level of an ad hominem attack. You're going to hear this a lot tonight. This is something you hear recently in the political scene where you'll name candidates, right? Like bullies do this a lot, okay? And they'll find someone and they'll say, okay, this is, Mr. Shorty over here or whatever. It sounds stupid, right? But if they're a short person, then you're essentially nicknaming them and you're trying to manipulate people into believing that they're bad or what they say doesn't matter because you've given them a name. You've essentially taken power from them. You're basically saying, hey, this person right here, it doesn't deserve to be seen as a person. What they deserve to be seen as is what comes out of my mouth, and that's how you, the audience, should reflect on that and understand that. Okay, so that's an important one you hear all the time. Okay, here's another really big one. This is called a straw man argument, okay? And essentially, it's a way to make one's position look stronger than it usually is. Using this fallacy, opposing views are characterized as non-starters, lifeless, truthless, or wholly unreliable, okay? So, let's see, here's a straw man argument from the article itself. The senator thinks we can solve all our ecological problems by driving a Prius. So what's the straw man in that? Doesn't that seem like that's a little bit of a stretch there? Here's another one. Quite the contrary. The senator thinks the environment is such a wreck that no one's car choice, driving habits would make the slightest difference. Did you catch that? So essentially you're attacking a position that the opponent doesn't hold. Okay. So you'll see this a lot tonight too as well. What essentially happens is when someone creates an idea, it's very similar to an ad hominem in a sense that they're both logical flaws, but the first one basically attacks you're naming someone, and the second one is kind of like an attack on the idea of what a person's argument is or beliefs are, but an extended, exaggerated version of them. So let's say I'm a truck driver, right? Okay, well, someone would say, I'm not even clean because I'm a truck driver. Okay, it's like, well, that's a little bit of a stretch there, because what does being a truck driver have to do with being clean? It has nothing to do with being clean. They're completely irrelevant, right? So you're basically giving someone a position that they do not hold. It's a very manipulative way of going against someone, and it's very malicious. Again, this is something you see from bullies all the time. Okay. You get things like an appeal to ignorance. That's another ad hominem, and that's just acting really stupid. Here's a great example from the article. No one has ever been able to prove definitively that aliens exist, so they must not be real. And again, the opposite of the reverse of that, which is the same thing. No one has been able to disprove aliens exist, so they must be fake. So it's one of those things where you're basically just using whatever to basically say, hey, this is an unprovable point of view. You see this a lot in society today. I love when people bring this up because it's so easy to pick out, and it's so easy to hear someone say, okay, well, this is the only solution we can have because, all this information. It's like, well, no, it's not the only solution. We just don't know what the other solutions are. So pause, take a second, guard yourself against it, and say, wait a minute, that may not be true. Now, here's my favorite one. False dilemma or false dichotomy. Okay, so this has been such a prevalent thing in today's society, I believe, and perhaps the most prevalent fallacy that you can possibly find, right? And so basically this one essentially says, okay, there's only two options between things. You hear this again and again and again. You're either for us or against us. You love me or you don't love me. It's war or we look weak. This is a brilliant one. People fall into this trap, and don't let yourself fall into this trap as well, because that allows you yourself to repeat something that is not true. You're repeating something without this idea of a shade of gray, right? Because in life, all you have are shades of gray. There's very rarely anything that's black and white. And that's what this fallacy suggests, that the only option you have is black and white. That's not true. Okay, so be on guard for that. And just make sure that if someone presents you a false dichotomy, you don't fall into the trap of saying, okay, wow, basically this is something that I have to choose to be for them or against them, and I don't want to be against them, so I'll be for them. No. Don't allow someone to box you in, to trap you in an argument, to trap you into changing your mind on something you may not believe in by saying there's only two options. There is almost never only two options in life on anything, okay? And if someone is refusing to acknowledge that there's additional options available, that is because they are trying to bully you into something that is not true. Do not allow yourself to be bullied, okay? You're stronger than that. And if you're not, learn how to be. Okay, slippery slope. You're going to see this one a lot too. So this is where basically someone essentially builds, and I like to call it more of a snowball than a slippery slope, but it's more or less the same thing. You build and build and build and build into basically a conclusion, but it starts from very little evidence, right? So let's do one right now in real time. Okay, so this is Fiji water right here I'm drinking. Tastes good, but you know what? This bottle right here, this bottle looks like it is plastic, and if it's plastic, that definitely means that it had to come from a facility, and if it came from a facility, Well, that definitely means that people had to work in that facility, and likely, if it was in a facility where people were working, a lot of people got hurt. And if a lot of people got hurt, that means Fiji water's murdering people. And I don't want that, so I can't drink this water because Fiji water represents the death of many people. You know, that's a bit of a slippery slope. How did you get there? Did you really add two and two together? Did you just kind of walk your way there? Or does that kind of seem exaggerated to a point where is that really the case, right? Did you really go that far, or did you really need to? Okay, let's give ourselves one more. We got hasty generalizations, but everyone knows about that. That's basically generalizing, saying, hey, there's no agreed upon specific answer to something, so let's just choose the most sufficient evidence without going deeper to suggest a better answer might be available. And let's end with an appeal to authority. And actually, let's not. Let's give two more. All right, so we have appeal to authority. And we'll be brief on this one. This one is basically essentially where you're assuming that because someone is in a position of power, that they have the authority to provide the correct answers. Now, this is kind of an interesting one, too, because one would assume that the only way to get to a position of power is to have the authority or the gall or the ability to get there, but that's not always the case, right? So if you question something, allow yourself to continue questioning that thing. Don't allow yourself to be let off the hook, because you're going to eventually be undermined by someone who uses an appeal to authority. At least I've seen this a lot of times, where people will say, well, he's a doctor, so he knows everything about medicine. And it's like, no, there's thousands of different types of doctors. They don't know everything. They're and I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to speak for doctors, but it's impossible for everyone to know everything, even if they're in that specific field, right? Like, even if you're a soldier, does that mean you know everything about the military? No. And I don't think any soldier would say they do. Again, I'm not going to speak for soldiers because that's not what I do, but in general, you get where I'm going. Appeal to authority you see happen a lot of times in debates where they say, this person is the head of this commission or the head of this department, and therefore they have the power to determine what's the best course of action. It's like, no, that's exactly probably wrong, because a lot of these people that get appointed to these positions, they have no experience in their field. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they have very deep, knowledgeable experience, but a lot of times they have no experience. And it was like they were appointed to run a department of something they have no idea in. Doesn't sound like it's that logical to me. Now, finally, here's the last one I would recommend everyone guard yourselves from. Bandwagon fallacy, okay? This is when, and everyone knows this one, I hope, where they say, okay, well, everyone's doing it, so I should too. It's like, no, you really probably shouldn't do it because everyone's doing it. I think it's important to watch out for people that try to use this on you. A lot of times they call it mob mentality, and it can be very scary. It's something that happens all the time, and it's almost impossible to stop, which is interesting, especially in gatherings of large crowds. You can't really stop a mob. Because once a group of people has a certain idea, it's very hard to turn them to change their mindset on something, right? Now, you can talk to anyone individually and you can convince someone, even though that's even unlikely as well, but it is possible to do that. It's almost impossible to convince a mob, and I'm just using the word mob, right? But in place of group of people, right? But don't allow people to say, okay, so we're all doing this, so you should come too. No, we shouldn't, okay? It doesn't matter if everyone in the world thinks a certain way. You have your own freedom. You have your own mind. You have the ability to say yes or no. You are your own person, so you should practice that to the fullest. Otherwise, what are you doing? So these are a couple of the fallacies. That was fun for me. I'm really excited for the debates tonight. We'll see how everything goes. Again, most people are probably already decided. But with that being said, we'll close up episode 10, and we'll roll right into episode 11 tomorrow. Thanks for listening. If you haven't yet, please like, subscribe. It really does help me out. And you can find me on all major podcast platforms as of yesterday and YouTube. So thanks, everyone. I'll catch you later. Broadcast out.